From Milton's Paradise Lost to Bad Boys and Femme Fatale, we are seduced by the dark and dangerous. Why does the devil have the best tunes? Have we sanitized the good and made it vacuous? Can we imagine a world where the good was exciting, dramatic, and fun? Or are danger and denial somehow essential to being alive? Let me introduce our speakers more fully. So we have Christopher Hamilton. Christopher is reader in philosophy at King's College London, where he teaches philosophy, literature, and film. He specialises in the work of Kierkegaard and Nietzsche. John Milbank is a theologian and founder of the Radical Orthodoxy movement. His books include The Monstrosity of Christ, co-authored with Slavoj Žižek, and his most recent book is The Politics of Virtue. And last but not least, Patricia MacCormack is Professor of Continental Philosophy at Anglia Ruskin. Her books include Sinosexuality, The Animal Catalyst, Posthuman Ethics, and most recently, Ecosophical Aesthetics. So let's start with our first question. Have we turned the idea of goodness into something empty and lifeless? And Chris, I think we'll turn to you first.
The first thing I would say with respect to thinking about good and evil and our view of them is that it seems to me perfectly manifest that human beings have a nature, and it's that part of their nature is to be aggressive. If you imagined coming to a planet with a species like ours, and you'd never been to that planet before, and you just watched how those creatures behaved and the history, and you saw human history, which, as the great German philosopher Hegel said, is a slaughter bench. I think what you would see is that it is essentially that. It's one bloodbath after another. This isn't to deny, of course, that there are good things that human beings have done, some of them absolutely magnificent, morally speaking, and in the arts and so on. But it seems to me completely clear that the explanation for human history, being as it is indeed that human beings are by nature aggressive creatures. We're also highly intelligent. That's to say, we're very, very good at survival, but pretty much bad at everything else, including controlling ourselves. And we have used our intelligence to outstrip by a long way our instinctual capacities to restrain ourselves. In other words, to put it more simply, we have weapons with which we can kill each other. So one aspect of, I think, the problem that we have in thinking about good is that we do have a very primal fascination towards violence and aggression, and I think we're largely in denial about that. I think that particularly in modernity in the modern West, we like to think, we have in the term used for the debate, sanitized our understanding of the good. So that's the first point I make. The second point I would make is that if we are thinking about the notion of the good, and we're thinking about that particularly, of course, in a moral context, I take it, in this debate, because, of course, there are plenty of things that might be good that we can fully accept. I mean, questions of exciting ways of life, but they might be morally suspect. So if we're restricting ourselves to the idea of the morally good, then it seems to me the other thing we have to bear in mind is that we have a deeply fragmented notion of what that is. We have that fragmented notion for a variety of reasons. One is that we are the inheritors in particular of course, Greek, but also Christian, Judeo-Christian culture, which themselves are highly complex in their view of the good. But we can put that very, very simply by saying that we have notions of the morally good which are in conflict with each other. I mean, take classically the relationship, say, between mercy and justice. We know that we can see these in particular cases as being morally good. It can be morally good to forgive, to exercise mercy, and so on. But we can also see that in some way that is in conflict with the notion of justice, with what somebody deserves as a result of what he or she has done. So one problem we have, I think, also in thinking about the notion of the good is this fragmented aspect to it. The third thing that I think is difficult is that we have inherited, particularly from Christianity, or at least some strands of Christianity, or perhaps more directly from the life of Jesus, an idea of the good as being absolutely pure. And that seems to me, in one way, a wholly mistaken idea, and in another way, quite correct. The way in which I think it's mistaken is that it seems to me that to put it in these terms, the virtues and vices are bound up with each other. The best example of this is love. Any kind of love, romantic love, but love of friendship, also the love that people have for their parents or their children and so on, or the love that people have for a country, or maybe even for a vocation, is partly underwritten by deeply egotistical drives. You know, the parents who are proud of their children at the school pantomime, these are my kids, and look at my kids, how lovely they are. Now, I've sometimes said this to audiences who then think I'm being cynical. I'm not being cynical at all. I think it's perfectly normal. I think it's perfectly natural that we have this egotistical attachment to those who are close to us, who are dear to us. But it is nonetheless an egotistical attachment. It's about me and about my life and what revolves around me. And it seems to me that we are badly in denial about that because we conceptualize the good as being pure. We have the idea that you could be wholly virtuous without any kind of as it were, the vices underwriting the virtues. And it seems to me that philosophers such as Nietzsche are quite right, which is that if you were to rid the human soul of the vices, you would rid it at the same time of the virtues, and that we're very dishonest about that. However, so at one level, I think the idea of the good as absolutely pure is mistaken. On the other hand, I think there is something in the idea. And it is an idea we do occasionally in our lives, very rarely, or looking at the lives of other people, get a sense of the possibility of a kind of life which is absolutely lived in pure goodness, a kind of purity, in a way a certain kind of innocence, but not an innocence that doesn't know about the ways of the world. But my view is that in the Western tradition we have attached that notion very, very strongly to the life of Jesus, which probably in certain ways does express that, for example, in his willingness to go to the cross. But that it's not a form of goodness that can actually be embodied in human life. Indeed, I agree with the German philosopher Hannah Arendt that kind of goodness is destructive of the political realm and destructive of human plurality, so that we have an intimation of a certain kind of moral goodness, but it cannot be embodied in our lives.
Thanks. Over to you, John. Do you think we've sanitized the good?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're profoundly under the delusion that the good is boring. I think one of the reasons for that is we think of the good as something primarily that we have to do. But of course, everything that fully exists is good, like today and Hail Why and the whole area. And the goodness is first experienced in that way, I think, as a gift. And the second thing is we think of goodness in terms of rules and the habitual and the predictable. But we should by now have learned from Henri Bergson that it's exactly the opposite way round, that everything merely identically repeated and merely habitual is in fact bad, is in fact evil. The real good is always original, always surprising, always apt to the arising situation. Otherwise, it just isn't good at all. So we have a completely false idea about the good. I think the other thing is that in our life today, where we're no longer mainly agricultural laborers or craftsmen, we need endless titillation and diversion. So we've forgotten the fundamental good of absorption. It's absorption that really makes us happy. Absorption in agriculture, in gardening, in craft, in dancing, in friendship, in sex, dancing like at this festival, in music. Those are the things that really make us happy. And there's very little amounts of kind of absorption going on in the modern world. There's very little absorption on offer. It's interesting that you can much more read a poem again and again or listen to a symphony again and again than you can kind of watch a film again and again, or even read a novel or even Shakespeare again and again. Music, which is kind of nearer to sort of peace and good, is more something, I think, that you can do again and again. I think that the further illusion that we're under is a failure to read St. Paul properly, who'd already said everything that Nietzsche said, only infinitely more radically, because Paul saw the link between law and transgression. So we only think the game of transgression is fun because we're always affirming the law.
For more debates, talks, and interviews, subscribe today to the Institute of Art and Ideas at IAI TV.